They never told me how loud silence could be until I took this job. Out here in the Cascades, you don't forget you're alone. Not for long. The wind pushes through the trees like a warning. The birds fall quiet all at once, and you start to wonder if the forest is listening to you as much as you're listening to it. I used to laugh at that kind of talk when I was new. Old ranger nonsense, I'd call it. But the longer I've stayed here, the more I understand why the others left and why I can't. Welcome to Narrative Strokes. My name's Ellie Voss. I've been a U.S. Park Ranger for 8 years. 6 of them posted here at Rayburn National Forest, a protected stretch of dense pine, ancient rock formations, and a history that runs deeper than the roots beneath our boots. Officially, we cover about 200 square miles of wilderness. Unofficially, there are areas we don't step into unless absolutely necessary. No trails, no campsites, no reason to go. At least, that's what we tell the tourists. Rayburn isn't famous. It's not Yellowstone or Yosemite. We don't get many visitors outside of the summer months, and that's just how I like it. It's quiet work, maintaining trails, managing wildlife logs, checking permits, and occasionally guiding some city kid who thought they could solo hike in sneakers. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of peace you can't get in the city. Still, every ranger here gets the talk, usually over a cheap beer at the station, after your 3rd or 4th solo patrol. The older rangers, those grizzled lifers who speak in half sentences and stare too long at the tree line, they'll mention it casually, like they're testing the waters. You ever hear your own name out there? One might say. Or, sound carries strange past the switchback trails. You're supposed to laugh. I did. I thought it was hazing. Now I know better. Because something does live in the forest. Something old. And it's not just the cold wind that whistles your name when you're alone. It started with a missing hiker. That's not unusual out here. Not really. People overestimate their stamina, forget their gear, wander off trail. Most of the time, they turn up within a day, embarrassed and sunburned, maybe with a twisted ankle and a story about a bear that was really just a deer in bad lighting. But this one was different. His name was Dylan Griggs, 26. Out-of-state plates. According to the logbook, he checked in at the South Rim Gate early Friday morning, said he was taking the Lakeside Trail Loop, an easy enough hike for a reasonably fit person, especially in summer. He didn't check out by dusk, which raised a flag. We waited till morning to be sure, then launched a preliminary search. No response on the emergency frequency. No pings from the limited GPS towers. No trace on the drone sweep. Not even a campfire scar. I joined the second sweep with Ranger Jules, a good guy, solid in the field. We split up past the trailhead, standard protocol, fanning out in low sweep arcs toward the inner forest. That's when something crackled through my radio like a weak signal, a flickering voice buried under static.
Help!
I stopped, raised the receiver. Unit 1, say again. Is that you, Jules? Nothing but soft static. Then again, this time clearer.
Can you hear me, please? I'm lost.
The voice cracked, warped mid-word, like a tape chewed up and spit back out. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to admit it, but it sounded like the missing hiker, or close to him. I'd only heard him speak once at the check-in station, but something about the voice felt familiar and off, like someone trying to imitate the way he spoke, but with the wrong cadence, too flat, pauses in all the wrong places. Dylan? I tried. If that's you, give me your location. Silence. Then a sharp click, like someone tapping the microphone right against their teeth. Jules came back on the line a few minutes later. I asked if he'd heard it. He hadn't. Thought it might have been bleed over from the repeater tower or just interference. But later that night, back at the ranger station, I heard it again. And this time, it wasn't on the radio. I'd just finished logging the day's report and was locking up the supply shed when a voice called from the tree line. Ellie? I turned so fast my keys slipped from my hand. Jules? I called back. Silence. Then again, from the same spot, maybe 20 feet into the woods. Ellie, over here. The voice was too stiff, like someone reading from a script. The words were correct, but the emotion wasn't. Jules has a rasp to his voice from years of smoking. This voice didn't. It was clean, artificial. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped just past the edge of the tree line, scanning. Say something else, I said loudly. A beat passed. Ellie, it said again. Same tone, same inflection, as if it only knew the one word. The hairs on my arm stood straight up. I backed away slowly, never turning my back on the trees. When I got inside the cabin, I radioed Jules to confirm he was still at the North Lookout Tower. He was, said he hadn't moved all night. I didn't sleep much after that. And in the morning, I found a set of footprints in the dirt just outside the cabin, boot prints, circling the building once before vanishing completely a few yards out, like the person just stopped existing. The search for Dylan Griggs continued into the next week. Additional rangers were called in, along with SAR volunteers and a K-9 unit. Everyone assumed he'd fallen into a ravine or gotten disoriented and doubled back into one of the older growth sectors. The deeper areas weren't mapped well. Centuries of deadfall and erosion had twisted the terrain beyond what GPS could handle. But none of us said what we were all starting to feel. Something wasn't right. I wasn't the only one hearing the voices anymore. Ranger Claiborne, tough, no-nonsense, ex-military, refused to go on patrol without a partner after he heard his dead sister calling to him from behind a rock formation. One of the search dogs refused to enter a stretch of woods just north of Lake Margot. It lay down and whined like it had been hit. When they tried to coax it forward, it snapped at its handler. That dog had worked in avalanche rescues and post-flood operations. Nothing had ever scared it before. I found myself avoiding windows at night. I kept the curtains shut and the porch lights off. The voice came back twice. Once calling me by a childhood nickname only my father used, and once using my own voice. Not just a recording, it spoke like me, thought like me, but it didn't understand what the words meant. The phrasing was wrong, too slow, robotic, as if someone had taken my speech and run it through a foreign translator and back again. On the 8th day of the search, I volunteered to check an older trail, one that branched off into what the maps called Sector 12, though no one really used the term anymore. It hadn't been maintained in years, overgrown and mostly forgotten. No campsites, no markers, just raw forest. I didn't tell anyone why I chose it. I'd seen something in the logbooks. A note from a ranger who'd worked here in the 1970s. It was scrawled in red pen along the margin of a patrol report. It said, Sector 12, do not enter past Marker 3. Voices at dusk, stay on trail. That note had me intrigued, and I had a feeling that if I were to find something, it would be here. I reached marker 3 just before noon. It was barely legible, a moss-covered wooden post, half rotted and leaning sideways. From there, the trail vanished. What replaced it was a kind of game trail, narrow, tangled, and disturbingly quiet. I pressed deeper, the air turning colder despite the summer heat. The trees were older here, impossibly tall, thick as pillars, their trunks warped with strange swirling bark patterns, as if something had coiled around them long ago and left scars. After walking for about 5 more minutes, I found the stones. They weren't ruins in the traditional sense, no temple, no walls, but there was structure to them. 5 large, upright stones arranged in a loose semicircle, each covered in carvings. Not Native American, not anything I recognized. The symbols were sharp, geometric, too precise for erosion to have shaped them naturally. In the center of the circle, a small pile of objects, bones, pieces of cloth, animal skulls, bits of metal, and a torn scrap of nylon with its tag still visible. Griggs. I reached down and lifted the torn piece with shaking hands, and that's when the forest went silent. Not just quiet, silent. No bird song, no wind, no buzzing flies, nothing. Then I heard my voice. "Why did you come here, Ellie?" It was flawless, down to the cadence, the pitch, but I didn't say it. I turned slowly, heart pounding. At the edge of the stone circle stood something. At that moment, I felt exposed, not in the normal wilderness survival kind of way. This was different. It felt like something was rummaging through my head, dragging up memories I hadn't touched in years. I saw Marley's face, clear as day, her laugh, her purple scarf she always wore. Marley was one of my former students before I became a ranger. She went missing on a field trip, never found. My testimony cleared me, but the guilt I thought I'd buried came back like it had just happened. I tried to push the thoughts away and focus on who or what was standing in front of me. I couldn't see it clearly. The air around it shimmered, like heat distortion off pavement. Its outline flickered between forms, tall, short, wide, thin, like it couldn't settle on what it wanted to be. And from its not mouth came another voice, my father's, weak and slurred, like in his final days. "I miss you, kiddo." I stepped back. Then came Jules' voice. "Ellie, help me. I'm trapped. It's dark." It knew them. It remembered them. And it was learning. I turned and ran. Didn't look back until I was halfway to the station. I didn't tell the others what I saw. Just logged no findings and claimed the path was too unstable for foot travel. But something followed me back. That night, the mimicry started again, not from the trees, but from inside the station. It began as faint whispers in the vents. At first, I thought it was the wind, until the voice came again, clear and close, from behind the door to the storage room. "Ellie." I gripped my flashlight and opened the door slowly. Nothing, just shelves of dried food, equipment, and rows of silent walkie-talkies. I left the room, locked it behind me, and sat at the ranger desk, every light on. The air was wrong, dense, charged. Then the station's backup radio, the one we rarely use, the one bolted to the wall, clicked on with a harsh pop. Static filled the room. A voice came through, a child's voice.
Miss Was, I'm lost.
My skin went cold. Marley. The voice was perfect. The cadence, the tiny lisp on S sounds. But Marley had never been anywhere near Rayburn. Unless... My stomach turned. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. It was like something had cracked open my memory and pulled her voice out of it. Like a crow stealing the shiny parts.
I can't find the trail.
The voice whimpered.
Can you help me?
And then silence. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. Every noise felt like a test. Every shadow too deep. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to go back to the stones. Whatever it was, this thing that could wear voices like masks, it was tied to that place. And if Dylan Griggs had any hope left, it would be there. I prepped a pack, 2 radios, flares, chalk to mark trees, and a handheld camcorder I'd borrowed from the station's forgotten education program. If I didn't make it back, someone needed to know what I saw. I waited until sunset. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to catch it off guard. The hike was fast, my memory of the trail sharper now. I crossed marker 3 just as the sun dipped behind the trees. The forest ahead swallowed the light whole. When I reached the stone circle, the temperature dropped like a switch had been flipped. I could see my breath, even in July. The stones looked different this time, slick with moisture, the carvings faintly glowing. In the center, the pile was gone. In its place, Dylan Griggs. He stood perfectly still, eyes blank, mouth open, but no breath, no movement, like a puppet waiting for strings. I raised my flashlight. Dylan? His head twitched unnaturally. Then he spoke, but the voice wasn't his. It was mine again. Why did you come back, Ellie? The thing stepped forward, jerking with unnatural rhythm. We learn. We listen. We remember, it said, cycling voices like a corrupted tape. Marley, my father, Jules, even my own. All of them fractured, felt rather than heard. Some were buried so deep I hadn't recalled them in years. That's when it clicked. It didn't mimic people it had met. It mimicked what I remembered. It wasn't trying to trick us. It was trying to become us. I reached into my pack, pulled out the flare, and lit it. A scream burst from the thing, not through its mouth, but from around it, from the trees, the air, the stones. Dozens of voices shrieking in unison, some familiar, some ancient and unplaceable. I threw the flare into the circle. The stones pulsed. The light flared bright white. And then, silence. The figure collapsed. When I stepped closer, it was gone. No Dylan, no cloth, no bones, only ash. And beneath it all, freshly disturbed dirt. As if something had clawed its way up from beneath. I made it back just before dawn. Jules found me on the station porch, covered in dirt and soot, clutching the dead camcorder to my chest like it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. They didn't ask many questions. Maybe they could see it in my eyes. That brittle, wide stare I've seen in survivors and war vets. Or maybe they'd heard enough strange calls, enough phantom voices to know the forest sometimes keeps its secrets by force. I tried to play the camcorder's tape, It was blank, static, like the machine had recorded something, but the image was too much for it to hold. The audio was worse, a low, grinding hum that turned sharp at random intervals, as if it were cutting between frequencies. The official report says Dylan Griggs was presumed deceased, lost in wilderness terrain. Nothing more. The search was called off after 12 days. They never let me go back to Sector 12, said it was too dangerous. Landslides, wildlife hazards. But they didn't mean bears or cliffs. They meant what's buried out there, what waits under the stones. I transferred to another park 3 months later, smaller, coastal, with more tourists than trees. I thought I could leave it behind, thought I could find something like peace. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the radio click on. No one touches it, no one calls out. It just opens, like a breath before a sentence, and waits. Last week, I was walking the ridge trail just before sundown when I heard a woman call from the woods below. The tone was familiar, too familiar. "Hey, Ranger Voss, over here." I froze. No one here knows my last name. They call me Ellie now. Everyone does. And then it said again, with perfect, eerie precision, "You're supposed to laugh." Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, then comment down below and let me know what you think. I'll see you next time with another story. Until then, keep smiling and don't forget to like and subscribe.